Chapter 9, Wooden Clue. As Bess continued to scream loudly, the man who was endeavoring to abduct Carla let go of her. He jumped into the waiting motorboat. Bess noticed for the first time that there was a pilot, but it was too dark for her to see his features. The craft roared off. "Oh, Carla!" she cried out, running forward to her friend. "Did he hurt you?" "He pinched my arm pretty hard, but other than that, I'm all right," Carla answered. Her Spanish costume was askew and her hair disheveled. As the two girls turned to walk back to the hotel, they were amazed to see people running from various directions. "Who screamed? Who got hurt?" a man asked. Bess tried to explain in English and Carla in Spanish. "Where did those men go? I will get them," said a young man. Bess pointed down the lake. The motorboat was already out of sight. "It's hopeless," she said. By this time, one of the hotel porters had pushed his way through the group and asked who the men were. "We don't know," Bess replied. Then, on a hunch, she added, "Did you see a man around the hotel who had red hair and wore a black and white checked sports jacket?" "Yes, I did. It was yesterday. He was on the second floor." "I do not know him." Suddenly the porter recognized Bess. "The man you speak of stood by the door across the hall from you." "What was he doing?" Carla asked. "Nothing when I passed by." After a few more questions and answers, the girls learned that the stranger had been there about the time the plaque must have been stolen. The porter also said that later the same red-haired person had been met on the grounds of the hotel by a man who lived in Bariloche. "Do you know this man's name?" Bess asked excitedly. "It is Frederick Wagner. He owns a motorboat and he might have taken the red-haired man." Bess and Carla looked questioningly at each other. Both had the same thought. Was the pilot of the kidnappers' motorboat this same Frederick Wagner? And was he perhaps the one who had taken Sanchez away from the Arajanas forest? The crowd dispersed, assured of the girls' well-being. Bess and Carla returned to the hotel. They found Nancy awake and George talking to her. As Carla took off her Spanish costume, Bess told the story of what had happened. Nancy sat straight up in bed. She reached for the telephone directory on the bedside table and began to rifle the pages. Presently, she said, "Here it is! Frederick Wagner in Bariloche." George asked what she planned to do with the information. "Call Senor Diaz and suggest he get in touch with the police immediately. This is too good a lead not to follow up." Nancy spoke to Senor Diaz, who promised to pass the information to the authorities at once. "Miss Drew, you are a fast-working detective," he praised her. Nancy laughed. "I have some excellent assistants, and this time all the credit goes to two of them, Mrs. Bess Marvin and Carla Ponce." "Well, congratulate them for me," Senor Diaz said. "And now I'll telephone the police." The girls hoped that they would get some word later that evening, but none came. Nancy sighed. "I have a strong hunch that Sanchez is hiding out with Wagner, but after what happened, they probably didn't go back to his home. The police will have to wait until they show up there." At 7 the next morning, Nancy's telephone rang, and she jumped to answer it. The Bariloche police were calling. "Is this Miss Drew?" "Yes." "We have 2 men in custody. One is Frederick Wagner. The other refuses to give his name, but we think it is Manuel Sanchez." The speaker requested that the girls come to Bariloche headquarters as soon as possible and bring the owner of the shop where the plaque transaction took place. "I'll inquire where she lives, and we'll all come together," Nancy promised. The clerk at the desk said that the shop was not open on Sunday, but he offered to call the woman at home and let Nancy talk with her. The gift shop owner was delighted to hear that the police had a suspect in custody and readily agreed to go with the girls. "I have a car. Suppose I pick you up at 8:30. "Thank you very much," said Nancy. "We'll be ready." The 4 girls dressed quickly and went downstairs to have breakfast. By 8:30, they were at the driveway entrance to the hotel. Senora Violetta drove up, and the girls hopped in. She was aghast upon hearing what had happened to Carla the night before. "You were very brave to undertake such detective work," she said. "I must admit I was very scared," Carla replied. When the group reached police headquarters, the two prisoners were brought in to Chief Castro's office. Senora Violetta pointed to Sanchez and cried, "He is the man! He is the one who sold the stolen plaque!" The police chief turned to the shop owner and the girls. Pointing to the other prisoner, he asked, "Do you recognize this man?" All of them said they did not. "He is Frederick Wagner," the chief said. "Unless you wish to file a complaint against this man, we cannot hold him." At that moment, a policeman walked into the room and spoke to his superior. After a few moments' conversation, Chief Castro said, "A quantity of Arajanas wood has been found in your home, Senor Wagner. You know it is scarce and against the law to remove any from that special forest." Wagner murmured, "I didn't get the wood from there. I got it somewhere else." "Suppose you tell us where." But Wagner refused to do this. "We will hold you until you talk," the chief said. He turned to Senora Violetta and the girls. "We will take full statements from all of you." Nancy gave details of the runaway ox and her suspicion that Sanchez was the instigator of the near accident. Carla told about the plaque being stolen from her bedroom and of the attempted abduction. "I think Wagner was the pilot of the boat, and the kidnapper is a friend of his and Manuel Sanchez." Chief Castro smiled. "You girls have had a rough time during your stay in the Argentine. Do visit our country sometime to have fun." "I'd like to," Nancy answered, and the other girls nodded. Senora Violetta took the girls to a church service, then back to the hotel. As they walked into the lobby, Senor Diaz hurried to them with a woman whom he introduced as Mrs. Percy, the one who had paid the $150 for the plaque. She was overjoyed to hear the good news. "I suggest," said Nancy, "that you go to headquarters at Bariloche and put in a claim for your money." "I will certainly do that, and thank you very much," Mrs. Percy said. She smiled. "You know I fell in love with that funny monkey. I am sorry to lose him." Nancy and her friends went upstairs to pack. While Carla was folding clothes into her suitcase, she brought up the subject of the Arajanas wood which had been found in Wagner's home. "What do you think he uses it for?" "I wish I knew," Nancy replied. "Maybe the police here will be able to find out. I'm glad, anyway, that we still have the plaque." "And that all of us are in one piece," George added. Carla sighed. "This whole thing is so complicated. When I asked you, Nancy, to work on my monkey mystery, I had no idea it would turn out to have so many angles to it." Nancy laughed. "I didn't either. But the more complicated the mystery is, the more fun it is to solve." Soon after lunch, Senor Ponce came for his daughter and her friends. Together, they drove to the Bariloche airport, where the rest of his group was waiting. The men were busy talking business and discussing the golf matches. When Carla learned that her father had won the big trophy, she hugged him. "Father, that is wonderful! Congratulations!" The other girls congratulated him too. After some urging, he opened one of his bags and showed them a silver cup. His company awarded it each year to the best golfer at the Lau Lau event. Everyone boarded the plane, and their bags were put behind the luggage harness just aft of the pilot's open compartment. As soon as clearance came from the tower, the pilot took off. For a long time, Nancy sat mulling over various angles of the mystery. But presently she became restless and decided to walk forward for a little exercise. When she reached the passenger loading door, located just behind the cruise compartment, Nancy paused and stood gazing with interest at the pilot and co-pilot. She marveled at the huge bank of switches, lights, buttons, and dials that almost surrounded the men. The plane was flying high now and at cruising speed. Suddenly, without warning, the door near Nancy began to open. The next instant, it swung up and outward. She felt herself being sucked out of the plane. Nancy made a wild grab for the luggage harness and clung tightly, but it seemed as if she did not have strength enough against the terrific wind to grasp it very long. She froze in terror. Others in the plane had been reading, but in an instant they felt a rush of air and looked up. All were horrified when they saw Nancy's predicament. Senor Ponce and a companion jumped up and grabbed Nancy, but they in turn felt themselves being pulled toward the opening. 2 men rushed forward and helped to pull all 3 to safety. Nancy dropped into an empty seat. She began to feel very dizzy. By this time, the crew had been alerted. The co-pilot leaped out of his seat and started back to see about closing the door. But at that moment, it ripped off. Then a loud thump resounded from the rear of the fuselage. The plane shuddered violently. "What is going on?" the captain shouted to his co-pilot. "The door! It ripped off the fuselage!" "It must have struck the stabilizer," the captain concluded. "We have tail damage, but we still have some control left." The pilot ordered his passengers to don their oxygen masks and fasten their seatbelts immediately. They quickly obeyed. After Nancy had taken several whiffs of oxygen, the dizziness left her, and she was able to breathe normally. Now a new worry took hold of the passengers. The plane began to yaw. Everyone sat tense and nervous. In as steady a voice as he could muster, the pilot said, "I will try to make it to Lima." End of chapter 9.